Tonight on Arming Main Street Radio.
So this might sound a little controversial, but
no, I agree.
Kendall explores unique sources of clean energy.
Humans will survive. They're just, you're going to eat cockroaches for dinner.
Connor's voting record is questioned.
Connor, you're probably going to push back. Please vote. Just vote. Please vote.
The boys get off track again.
And we are off on a tangent, so if you could...
Yeah, wait, we were talking about energy?
And Maddie dispenses indispensable advice on how to navigate an episode of Arming Main Street.
Kayvon, what were you going to say?
Yeah, sorry.
Forgot.
Oh, shit. It'll come back. Just interrupt.
Don't wanna be an American, baby.
This is Arming Main Street, episode 4. I'm Kendall, that's Connor, and let's get rolling. Unless you want to introduce yourself, Connor, I'm sorry. I keep doing
No, I appreciate you introing me because I would butcher it if I was trying to do it myself, so.
Yeah, so what are we talking about this week?
So this week, I think we're going to try to get into new energy from a political perspective, from a technological perspective, from a market perspective. We got a couple of guests here who are joining us. My friend Kayvon, my friend Bushin. Thank you guys for coming. Both of them have a lot of experience in the energy field from different backgrounds. They may or may not chime in. It's up to them. But we're glad they're here. So...
Yeah, so I guess we can, why don't we start with, so Kayvon provided us with a couple questions, so we'll kind of get rolling with that. I think the first thing, and this is an interesting one, when we think about energy, right, most of our energy comes from fossil fuels. So whether that be natural gas, whether that be oil. And so can we run out of oil globally? And I guess we can make that a little bit more broad. Can we run out of fossil fuels?
Yeah. So I guess really I like the question just as like a preface to the idea. People always talk about, 100 years from now, we might run out of X, oil in this part of the world or this part of the world, and that's going to be catastrophic for XYZ reason. So I think it's really a cool thought experiment to get into.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that because of our dependency on oil for energy production, or is it for other material production? Because I know there's a huge breakdown or discrepancy between, obviously, the utilization for energy, but also for plastics and other things like that.
Yeah, I think the use case for plastics has been booming for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. I think the main concern is really on the consumer oil side. So driving our cars, planes, powering all our transportation, buses, all that shit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think I guess I want to kind of ask the question, in your opinion, do you feel like we can run out of oil? I mean run dry globally.
Isn't that what fracking's trying to answer? We can get oil out of everything.
Every crack, everything.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to approach this more from the environmental side of things from what I've studied. There obviously is a finite amount, right, of oil on the planet. And at some point we would exhaust that.
Logically.
Right. I don't know how long. Is that 50 years? Is that 100 years? Is that 1,000 years?
How effectively can we measure the oil in the earth today?
So technology, as far as radar, a lot of the stuff that they can do, surveying has come a long way. Geosurveying and stuff, they're going 2 miles deep,
Gotcha.
running radar and trying to figure out the best places to put down rigs and bring oil, natural gas, hydrocarbons out of the ground.
Okay.
And I think the interesting part about the question really comes to, I think it's more of to me an economics.
Yeah.
Exercise where I think, let's say, it looks like we're at a place where we're going to run out of oil in the next, let's say, 50 years or whatever. Mm-hmm. And as we're literally depleting our resources, this is where I think all the stuff I learned from work for the last couple of years has really colored my understanding and what I actually believe and perceive at this point. But I would think, or what I've seen is, as we start to run down, let's say globally, we're coming down on oil, naturally the price starts to run up, right? Right. So in my head, and what I believe is the price would run up to a point, and this is where commodities are nuts. I've been in the commodities trading space for 2.5 years now. Commodities I would describe as when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Okay. So supply and demand. Supply is non-existent and demand is going through the roof. So we're driving more and more every day, and supply is only dwindling. So as the price goes up, in my head, what essentially happens is you start to price out all of the demand. So oil essentially will become too expensive to use in our cars and power our transportation. So the next step in my head logically is we turn to another fuel source. So it doesn't have to be oil necessarily, but we're going to go back to fucking coal. We're going to use natural. We're going to find some way. We're going to use batteries in our buses, in our cars, in our planes. If oil gets to this crazy price in my head, and this is what I'm kind of is something that's kind of taught me is.
What's the time horizon look like for that?
It depends on how crazy the demand end is versus your supply situation. Okay. It can get as crazy as you can imagine.
Is there an estimate of how much oil's left relative to what we've used and like the burn rate we're going through?
It depends on where you look, but I think the
is there a consensus?
I wouldn't say there's consensus.
Is there a range?
People would say anywhere from 150 years. They'd say we'll never run out. So that's kind of like.
All right.
And I think why they say we'll never run out is you'll go up. The price of oil will keep going till we start using electricity to power all our cars and all that shit. It's literally cheaper and makes more sense at that point. And this is kind of like the price signal is literally going to say demand is going to be shut off at this end to kind of help level everything that's going on. And then this is going to incentivize producers to go find the oil in the hardest places in the world where they currently can't fund those projects. So there's oil in places where we know about, but it's too expensive. There's too many
red tape. In Antarctica?
Places like that. There's oil in places where like people live. It's kind of what I'm getting at.
Gotcha.
And if we really have to, and it gets to that point, producers and governments will get together and find ways to get us out of it. I guess. So you're going to have supply is going to start finding any and every molecule of oil, and demand is pricing out. So eventually we come back to an equilibrium, and we just keep playing this game.
Right. No, I mean that's such an interesting take, because I think, yes, if we were going to keep relying on fossil fuels the way that we do for the next 150 years, we would get there. I don't think we'll ever reach that point, though, because there are other incentives, right, that drive us towards other forms of energy. And we've talked about it before on the podcast, but that's mainly climate change, in the sense that, we really, I'm just going to be frank, we don't have 150 years of just burning oil the way we do now,
right.
Increasing population size, like that's just not going to happen. So I think really what probably happens, and we'll keep it in the short term, 50 to 100 years maybe, let's say, I think we start to move away from fossil fuels because of climate change. And what happens with that, the last thing I think that's going to come is the big time sort of manufacturing production. That's going to take a while to decarbonize. And then I think airplanes. That's a long way. Yeah, because, as much as we all want electric airplanes, I don't know how far along we are with that technology.
To your point, I would think, or not, I would also add tankers. Like,
yeah.
I think the 7 or 10 biggest tankers in the world add as much as like several large cities, like across like Asia or something like that. Like, it's nuts.
Yeah. Or we could also move to hydrogen. That's the other thing that could happen.
Or source
hydrogen
manufacturing.
is a little scary.
What do you think about? Okay, so I say we're actively looking and trying to figure out what hydrogen's going to look at. So that's where I'll leave that right now. Yeah. I'm interested in hydrogen.
For sure. Hydrogen is going to be tough because it's an explosive gas, right? So we'll see if we can make hydrogen safe enough to actually use.
Is it hydrogen fusion? Isn't that what it is that they're going for?
There's a
So
I think
isn't
there's
it like nuclear?
technologies, but like I think you're kind of onto the battery hydrogen sort of
Yeah.
technology where you get what is it like water as a byproduct
Yeah.
or something?
Yeah,
I think so.
exactly.
They already made prototypes of that already. They're working on it. It's been there in the market since last, like I think, at least what I have known for at least 5 to 6 years. They already have those, but as it is not feasible or practical to carry that amount of explosives on the roads, so
Yeah, right.
it's not been turned into.
Especially with semi-drivers these days. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Could you imagine?
Oh man.
So I think that kind of leads us, as far as our discussion. So we are most likely, I hope, moving away from fossil fuels in the sense that they're warming the planet, and we think they might be finite, right? And that new energy sources
I'll
might
argue
be.
with that. No, I won't argue with that. I think at some point we can run out. Right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, the next thing we're thinking about, and this is huge right now, right? In like places like West Virginia, coal country, where a whole industry is dying. And so, what is that like as far as our energy future? Seeing whole industries die in our economy, and like how does that? I guess how do we work around that? My initial thought is, I mean, it happens all the time. Rail used to be the primary form of transportation, and then it wasn't. Horse and buggy used to be amazing until,
I say we get back to it.
But
we got the car. So I
It just
think
feels like we always transition very abruptly between things. It's not very seamless because it doesn't seem like change happens before it's forced. I feel like without these regulations on emissions, like coming out of California and stuff, you don't see as much pressure on it
right.
in the public, at least.
No, that's true.
I think like there is much more to look at why the change is abruptly happening. As you mentioned, the rail industry or rail used to be the primary mode of transportation.
Right.
But if you look back, the oil and gas lobbying that started back in the days, you had to basically scrap all the railways and put more vehicles on the road because you wanted to sell more oil and gas and more cars because that's what driving the market right now.
So that-
And yeah.
That's the Rockefeller days.
The Rockefeller days,
those are the
exactly.
days. But if you're moving into something else and just scrapping the whole industry right now, we should look at the motives behind rather than just thinking about like if this is really a smart move to do.
That's fair. That's fair.
Right. I mean, it kind of reminds me, and we kind of talked about this earlier, Bhushan, about like the healthcare market itself is right now in the state of transition because they made all the costs transparent. It seems like with sort of the environmental shift here, we're kind of forcing automakers' hands, and like Bhushan's pointing out, like interests like China, who are producing all of the solar batteries, are going to be, benefiting from this, and one would say that's, kind of very disruptive because of like the labor practices that are producing these batteries, plus the, the emissions that they're releasing from the production of those facilities.
They're not clean. Right?
No.
Yeah, it's not. And like so far from the pollution perspective of oil and gas in the vehicle industry, as the standards of pollution control have gone so high that there is still a scope that they're working on of getting them as close to zero. There is of course research needs to be done, but if you just try to basically say every car makes pollution to the same extent, it's not a hard fact because it's accumulated throughout the years and
Some cars are way worse than
Yeah.
others.
Right. And I mean, like, that's just a quick tangent. I mean, that's electric cars, right? Electric cars are not carbon neutral. It's just that once they are made, they don't pollute nearly as much
right.
as a traditional ICE engine. But, I mean, there are automakers. I know Porsche is the main one because they really want to keep the 911. They're working on biofuels, right? So that's, I mean, biofuels have been there for a long time.
I
But
was going to ask, have we have an idea of what like the large scale recycling effort will look like once 10 years after these people drive these Teslas into the ground?
yeah, so that's the other thing is there are companies legitimately. I think Rivian is one of the main ones. They are building their vehicles in such a way, understanding that all the batteries are going to have a second life, and like how are we going to use those batteries. So companies are thinking about it. I think even GM is thinking about things like that.
Are these cars being built in a way that they're going to be able to be worked on for years and repairable, or not? Because I feel like a lot of people do fix up cars today. They don't always just trade them in.
Tesla is going to be pretty expensive, I think, to fix over time. They have a they're like the Apple of electric cars, right? Like they want to keep things in-house. But generally, I think is the big three, like, get more involved. As new startups come along, I think you're going to see, you're still going to need like maintenance for like tire rotations, things like that. You just won't need like an oil change. And in fact, I think electric cars will actually end up being more reliable because there's less moving parts.
It's like 100-something moving parts versus like a mechanical vehicle is like thousands of moving parts.
Exactly over time. So
Not to get off on a tangent, sorry, but like what happens to like, you know, people who are working on vehicles? Yeah, for Pet Boys, like how do you transition? I know that's kind of a loaded question.
That gets back to the larger question of all these jobs, how do you transition?
I think
That's why you have to look at the motive. Why, if you are,
Is this where the calls for UBI really get answered? Because like mass unemployment, or are they going to do job retraining where everyone's going to be a computer scientist?
I think the thing about it is that the sort of working with your hands, that kind of labor will still be necessary in some way, shape, and form, right? Like, we can't 3D print windmills in the middle of nowhere yet. So somebody's got to build those, right? And there's going to be training for things like that. I think the infrastructure, green infrastructure, will create a lot of jobs. Now, I'm not saying that replaces everything, right? Like, working on an electric vehicle, you're probably going to have to be doggone near a rocket scientist, like working on batteries and motors in a way that would be pretty tough. But I'm not sure.
It's crazy because I think, I guess in America, our mode has been to just kind of march forward no matter what's happening, no matter how bad the economy gets. We're just going to kind of keep this whole pandemic.
Pick yourself up, yeah.
So this whole pandemic, even within a month, we were all working. So like I'm afraid as to what can happen. I would love to see something preemptively like started up. I don't know if that's via UBI or these programs to retrain people, but
yeah, we gotta do something in the sense that, what do? You're in a rock and a hard place when these jobs legitimately are also destroying the planet, and at the end of the day, we gotta have a planet to live on for people to, fight over all the different things, right?
Well, yeah, because if you leave a bunch of people without purpose or something to do, what happens?
Exactly. So I think...
and the means to subsist also, obviously.
Right. Chad, you were going to...
What would one of those preemptive measures feasibly look like?
I think the easiest one that comes to mind right away, right, is just investment in job retraining. Because then you're
but we've had job retraining programs for years, and like at the state level, at the city level, and they're pretty, they're pretty poorly run, and they have poor placement rates.
And I think another thing that I might have seen a couple of years back is the younger people can a lot of times pick up and sort of learn skills, whereas people that are in their 40s. A lot of times those programs are literally just wasting them.
There's a graph at like the age of 30, you kind of meet your peak level of like engagement and taking in new information, and then it exponentially drops from there, unfortunately.
Okay. That probably comes from like dissociative labor theory.
Yeah.
Where you're checked out of the world.
Sure.
Right. I guess the problem is if you go the UBI route, which I'm not necessarily gonna stake a position on here, it's just more like you're gonna have to generate so much wealth in a very specific portion of the economy and hope that is then enough to
You mean the
pay
consumer
folks.
economy?
not just the consumer economy, but think about the kinds of jobs that will be available in the future as we lose a lot of that working with your hands. Now, I am not a automation is killing every job kind of person, because I just think there are going to be certain things that we don't like. I don't know. Are we going to build a robot to pave roads? Maybe, but how far away is that, right? Like we still have.
How safe is it?
Right.
So one time it messes up and does something, or
Exactly. So I feel like we still have
move fast
decades.
and break things. So
and that's what the Silicon Valley mantra.
yeah, exactly.
If
But like
Silicon
it
Washington-
happens.
If Silicon Valley could take over Washington, I feel like that would be like
Oh
how we
goodness.
do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. We would get to UBI pretty fast if Silicon Valley took over Washington, because we would move extremely fast. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, we're automating that. We're figuring this
You leave so
out."
many people behind, right?
Yeah. So I think that's the problem. We need that balance of labor that works with their hands, and then the traditional kind of white collar jobs. The other thing you have to think about too is
But I think a lot of those white collar jobs are going to be disappearing as well. Like probably more of them than the blue collar jobs, because there will always be
Pharmacy.
maintenance over the robots, and then
I guess
some human oracles basically interfacing with
maybe
robots.
I'm just an old man, but I just do not see us getting good enough that the price of these technologies comes down enough to make
They have
them.
artificial intelligence who are putting copywriters out of work. They can automate your advertising words.
Yeah, but what I guess my question is when do you think that hits critical mass, such that it's like, well, there's no reason to have a copywriter
Moore's law would
anymore?
say like next year. It's exponential. Like the fact that they already introduced like automated copywriting means that like next year they could have actually script writing. Like all of these professions that keep people employed from entertainment could be all done by an algorithm, and TikTok's already kind of proving that.
Yeah, but there's always going to be a need for that like human touch, I would say.
It's crazy because I almost feel like we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. Like I think 10 years is going to look way different, but in the next year, the next 5 years, I'd be surprised. Like I'd be like, wow, like they're really pushing this technology.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be next year. I just mean like it's moving at a pace that's much faster than I think people are appreciating.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like the fact that we're like on the fourth industrial revolution, basically, like on the peak of it right now, is like crazy because it's taken like thousands of years, then a couple hundred years, and now it's like 50 years since like we
Faster and faster.
exactly.
Yeah. That cumulative knowledge.
So there's something that I found kind of interesting when I hear people talking about the middle class. So as these jobs, as AI moves in, white collar, blue collar jobs, whatever it is, the evaporation of the middle class. It's kind of crazy because I almost think that there's two things going on. I think there's some automation, some people being replaced, whatever it might be. But at the other side of it, I think we had a really good run. I think there was a lot of jobs in a lot of places that basically built up and had people like a DT specifically. Like there's a lot of people that I think took up good jobs and stayed there for 20 years and they don't do a whole lot, that when this person retires, they're not going to hire someone else. They're just going to either move that job function into somebody else
Or
automate it
offshore.
to away, something like that. So when they're talking about the middle class shrinking, I think that's a big component of these people kind of like aging out and us getting more effective,
It's not
efficient.
It's
So
not
you
even
don't
that the
need
middle
job.
class is shrinking, it's that it is actually becoming a global middle class,
Okay.
and so the United
okay.
States bubble is actually bursting.
That's fair.
Right, if you think of it as a market bubble, we're overvalued now that talent is distributed across the world and you can communicate with it.
And that's kind of what happened with the auto workers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It got too
We
expensive.
globalized them
It got
and
too expensive, so
manufacturing outsourced.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and
But I think source manufacturing is more sustainable, and if you pair it with like clean energy technology and batteries, like we could be looking at stuff that's more exciting. But I think Bhushan also pointed out like we don't have the materials for batteries here in the U.S., but all the materials for the batteries are in China, So that's going to cost us an arm and a leg and natural resource cost to actually produce all these batteries.
Isn't it in Africa? And China's like predominantly mining it. But also Greenland is opening up and is a territory that Trump was looking to purchase.
No, I mean, you're exactly right. I think one, unfortunately, Africa, as has been, I guess, since we'll call it.
Go for it.
When Europeans figured out how to set sail, Africa's been being exploited a little bit, right? So yes,
to this day.
Yeah, to this day, and that is very true. And the rare metals needed for batteries, I think, are typically being mined out of
80%
Okay.
Yeah.
from China.
And so then the Belts and Roads Initiative really takes hold here because they've been offering economic lifelines to countries we've been, kind of screwing for years and years and years.
Exactly. And I think the thing about it is when we're talking about clean energy, unless we figure out nuclear fusion, which is like the holy grail, right?
Your boy Bill Gates has this, right?
I wish. That's the holy grail of energy, because it's just like, oh, here's this infinite source of energy. We don't even need to store it because we can create it 24/7, 365. I think
the whole system's fucked up at that point. You just you're literally right. Yeah.
Exactly. We are still a long way away. So I think, really, if you're looking at even alternative forms of energy, like the most popular are wind, solar, hydropower, and even hydropower has its issues, right? Because you build a dam, you literally destroy an ecosystem. What does that do? Sure. That whole deal. But Bill Gates has been investing in a company for years, and I was watching the documentaries on Netflix. Forget exactly the name, but I think if you just Google like Bill Gates Netflix documentary, you can find it. Essentially, he was like, well, nuclear kind of solves a lot of these problems. Yeah. And everybody, it's dangerous. And so he decided to look at the problem holistically with a team, obviously, and they found that old school nuclear reactors are really inefficient and really badly designed. And so he and this team, they designed a new kind of nuclear reactor that actually utilizes nuclear waste.
Is this
It's Inside Bill's Brain, Decoding Bill Gates documentary on Netflix.
Perfect. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because, right, if we can get nuclear, okay, that might solve the immediate sort of energy needs, but we still need a way to store all of this energy, right? Sure. And that's the problem. And each one of these renewable energy sources has its own downsides associated with it, which is why we need the mix. And the mix, again, I'm going to keep harping on environmental stuff. We were talking about it off air. People are like, well, great, we'll figure out solid state batteries and we'll just like throw a ton of solar panels in the Sahara Desert. And it's like, well, not so fast. Those solar panels, they absorb a lot of heat. You heat up the Sahara Desert even more than it already is. You start changing weather patterns. Places that used to get rain don't get rain.
It's happening.
Right.
It's a lot of black paint and solar,
exactly,
reflection absorption going on in one place.
And the only way to really solve that is then to make like clear solar panels, probably.
Wow.
So I feel bad for that kid that's like grinding right now at MIT that's gonna have to figure that out.
I think there's a
is there like a polarization maybe idea there, because
like prism?
No, how sunglasses, when you polarize them, it's
probably
something like that.
Probably something along those lines.
Catch as much light as possible.
Yeah.
Kayvon, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, sorry.
Forgot.
Oh shit! It'll come back. Just interrupt.
But yeah, no, I think as far as alternative forms, I think no matter what, we're gonna need the mix.
I got it. I think there's another let's say generation of nuclear reactors they're working on called the modular units, and these are maybe one, I would say like 6.
Oh, are
maybe.
those the mini? They're like mini
How about
reactors.
this?
Yes.
Yeah.
And to get the same output as one of the, so the big reactors are huge capital projects that take a lot of time, energy, and construction.
Maintenance.
Yep. So these micro units can be prefabricated in the factory, brought on site, hooked up, and basically I think to get the equivalent side of like one of the really big ones, it's like 12,000 megawatts, and that powers like maybe 50,000 homes. You'd probably need somewhere around 20-25 of these smaller units, but there's security measures that they put in them. So like say if one or two of them melt down, they I think drop down into a specific safety type casket
Containment
thing.
center.
They've been putting a lot of work into this next generation, so I think there's
That's so cool.
stuff to pick up.
And
I did not know.
kind of to bounce off of that, actually, neighborhoods, there's like a pilot I know in Austin where they're trying to build out a whole neighborhood with its energy needs in mind first. So a lot of it is hydrothermal power for like heating and cooling and things like that.
Have you guys heard of the microgrids?
I wanted to ask, is this going back to Texas and the crisis that happened earlier this winter?
Oh, which part?
The microgrids.
The
Is
grid-
that,
so
is
I-
that sort of
I think this is something
going
that
down in their free market?
This is
or
something
is
that
that
could
separate?
help, but I think this is more of a Silicon Valley, out in California type thing. They're kind of cooking up. I'm sure Bill Gates is finished somewhere on it.
Yeah.
But the Texas stuff is, I think it's really interesting because, I mean, just the context of the grid and stuff that you're kind of talking about, nuclear provides this kind of baseline that maybe, 30% of the power you need in one area, it's always on, and it's very consistent. The wind, as we all kind of know, is it comes and goes. You put the turbines in one place, sometimes the winds don't blow. Like, I have guys that I work with that trade power in Texas, and we look at the model, and sometimes we're like, the forecast says this, but if they miss to this side, essentially all of the the wind that they're not going to get, the wind generation is going to basically leave a hole where we can bet on this power price kind of popping in the summer for months at a time. This is a consistent thing that's going on.
Yeah. I'm not shocked by that.
Solar provides like this weird, you've seen the duck chart, right?
Yep.
So in the middle of the day you get the most solar.
So does Texas basically act as a way to subsidize the cost of energy everywhere else in the country because of this free market grid? Because I know we're divided into the East and the West and Texas, basically.
Yeah.
But Texas is anything goes, and you guys are betting on the market in Texas. Is this like because they have all of these different facilities with...
Texas does a lot. I'd say Houston specifically, like the industrial petrochemical complex is huge. A lot of whether it's ethanol, a bunch of stuff is coming out of Texas. As far as their power grid, they're really their own kind of island.
Okay.
And they have a couple interconnects that allow not that much power to be passed through.
But I meant by your guys is basically buying and selling of the energy in their markets.
Yeah.
Does that way give you an ability to hedge your own energy costs or potentially be subsidizing the cost of the
We can
energy
pay for,
with that?
yeah, so there's stuff we can do, like we can, let's say, move energy to certain places. There's different things we can do, like sometimes they hedge out using different positions in that part of, let's say, like Texas. And I think a lot of times the thinking is this is the more volatile market. So if something's going to go and I want some protection to the high side or whatever, they're going to normally look to that place. There's different ways in which we like to use it. But I think the really interesting thing about that Texas market that you're kind of saying is, let's say like between the East and the Midwest major grids, there's like 26, 30 different like kind of big interconnects. Between Texas and the other ones, there's like 5.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Right. So when something really happens, they need to import power. What happens a lot of times is the prices go up, and that's the only reason people really care about that market, honestly.
Gotcha.
Because it's volatile.
I mean, that we saw it, right? There's a massive snowstorm. Freak weather events are going to start happening more often now. And I get it. Everybody was kind of bagging on the utility. Why wouldn't you weatherize? It's like, because it's Texas.
It's a once in 100-year storm that's been happening like 2 or 3 times the last few years.
Yeah. And so now it's to a place where you kind of have to go, look, either you all are going to weatherize your system or, at least in Texas, I'm sure the majority of folks that hated big government is going to come in and say, hey, you better weatherize this, or you're just going to join the grid. And I don't think Texas wants that. So I would assume at some point we're going to start weatherizing the grid in Texas, I would think. Because that's why we saw...
They're never going to learn. I feel like they're not going to learn.
I think
because big business got bailed out again.
Yeah, true.
And so, like, until they're slapped on... Like, it's just a slap on the wrist.
You gotta let the ones who don't hedge their bets, like, go down in capitalism, right?
That's how
there's
it's
a lot
supposed to
riding
work.
on it, though. There's a lot riding
Right,
on
so
it.
That's
And
true.
and the people there that don't like big government have a giant grasp on what really goes on in Texas. So it's hard to, like, get anything changed, really, because...
Yeah, that's a
they-
fair point.
Yeah. Sorry.
No,
That's
cool.
fair. I want the perspective. Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, those are great points. I just think when
I'm
you're
with you. You're saying the right thing. Will it happen? I'm skeptical.
yeah, and I think the problem is there are going to be a lot of, I mean, regionally, right? Like you've got Texas and its go it alone attitude. You've got West Virginia and it's like, hey, all of our sort of resources in this state were stripped, right? There wasn't a ton of that money going back into this community. So then, I could see a world where it's like, hey, coal is now no longer a thing at all. We're closing down every coal mine in America. That's going to hit places like West Virginia really hard. We're going to have to start paying reparations to places like, hey, I don't know what to tell you, West Virginia. Here's $1 billion to help figure out that transition.
So how does this not just become UBI then?
I guess maybe it does.
I guess maybe the question is how do you pay for the UBI?
Yeah. But what were you gonna say before?
Well, I think it's kind of crazy because
What if
these
you
other
just
energy sources-
redistributed government wages since that's already a UBI? Sorry.
That'd be cool.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I mean, I did, but for that joke.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think there's the actual, I want to say like the tailwinds of the world, the environment, the economy have just come down really hard on coal, putting a lot of money and subsidies into this area where we're probably not going to be getting, like you're saying, future energy from. Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And now I think we're seeing more jobs in the green space than we're seeing in, let's say, the dirty energy economy.
Yeah. I think it's just so tough because I think it's interesting for folks that are listening to really think about how much you've ever thought about energy and your own energy consumption, in the sense that really until I got to college, I just flipped on a light switch. I had never truly thought about energy consumption, my own personal energy consumption, and then the needs of trying to meet energy for just the building of things. Even all of this green infrastructure that we want to build. Yeah, we're gonna mix a lot of dirty in with that clean, right? In the sense that it's gonna take a lot of fossil fuels to even build the green infrastructure. And so how long does it take to get a return on investment on that? Those are all the
Does
questions.
that include
kind of around energy.
biocomposites and a lot of the other construction materials and stuff that people are looking into that are more, I don't know, are those still just as bad in terms of producing those materials?
So here's the big problem I see is no matter what we do, we're probably gonna need cement and steel. And the creation of cement and steel,
They do have biocomposites that are stronger than cement and steel today, though.
Yeah, but they're still prohibitively expensive.
Okay.
That's the problem. And so if you're trying to build out this infrastructure before we run out of time,
Is it a matter of incentive for the industry, or is it a matter of actual, like, they don't know how to scale production, or the resources aren't there to scale production?
think right now it is hard to scale production because it's hard to get this. So I think it's worth the segue here. So we're talking about energy, moving from fossil fuels, right, to clean energy requires massive investments in infrastructure. That means, weatherizing, I guess, green rising buildings, however you want to put that, right? Roads, bridges. all of these things. And so one of the areas that is very, very slow to innovate actually is construction. And because of that, I think there are some startups popping up, right, that are starting to like 3D print houses and like build modular homes to make things a little bit faster and more cost effective. But when you start adding in, unless we decide to subsidize it heavily, they're still going to look for the traditional materials, the steel, the cement, that kind of stuff. And the creation of those things is very energy intensive and typically a dirty process. There is clean steel, but again, prohibitively expensive. So it's about finding a way to scale.
Part of the problem is the companies that will cut corners and not try to use the safer, more expensive products will beat out, and as far as earnings, getting shareholders, funding, investment.
Would this be something where a carbon tax actually is useful,
100%.
right?
And that was maybe the only way you can start to level the cost, if you make the people polluting the government or polluting the environment responsible for, you know, X amount of, you know, you can only do this much before you start cleaning. Right. However that needs to look or work.
So I saw a graph probably like a week ago. I think that Morning Brew put out, and it's the fact that our carbon emissions, I mean, China is like our lead producer of carbon emissions currently, and Asia is also on an uptick. Europe and the US have tried to slightly reduce their carbon emissions, but like you have to get everyone on board in that circumstance, right? Because otherwise, if we're paying a carbon tax, it's like, well, fuck, we're not even the problem. Shit. Like, what do we do?
Well, we are like, we pollute like 30 times more than anyone else or something.
Like first world
like
countries in general, yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I'm just saying, like...
I think it's
not usually an individual thing. Sorry.
Right.
This is being applied to...
That's the power of statistics.
Corporations, in the sense that the Treasury Secretary just put out basically like a white paper on global taxes.
I saw. Okay, I need to check that out.
Yeah, so in a sense, I could see countries coming together in a treaty that's like, hey, there's a global.
But China's not joining that treaty.
No, but the thing is the only way to combat that is to create an incentive for China to go green. So if all of these other countries are banding together, right, to work as hard as they can to put together a carbon tax, make renewables and clean materials more competitive, at some point China's going to lose in that game.
No, you'd have to stop buying from China completely, because what's going to happen in the short term is China's going to be able to scale up their production ridiculously, because the demand is going to go to China, because China can sell it to us cheaper in our markets.
But I think you're right in that there are other things that go into that buying from China, right? Like,
what? We're going to tax them?
No, not that you're going to tax them, but just labor rights, things like that. So it's actually an easier case to me, in my mind, to say, yeah, we're just not doing this anymore.
I think there's...
Yeah, but I think the market's going to demand it, because if all the jobs are going, people are also like living on less money. There's growing divide in wealth, income inequality. Like, people need affordable stuff, and that's what China offers.
And nobody wants to be uncomfortable.
Like, sustainability is expensive.
Yeah. True, but I guess my counter to that will be, and we do actually have to give China some credit in that they have really pushed, right, nuclear energy. That's where a lot of those new nuclear reactors that Bill Gates' company kind of created, that's where they're being built. They've pushed electric vehicles. They're not thinking about it. I just think basically they're pulling what America did at the dawn of the 20th century. And you're not going to stop them, because frankly it'd be very hypocritical for America to be like, hey, you know how you're becoming an economic powerhouse, you should stop that now because we care about the planet. I doubt that'll fly.
And I think that the linchpin is enough people coming together to, let's say, influence what China ends up doing. I think if it's half the world, that might not be enough. But I think if you have the majority of people at the end of the day, they will lose. But that is like almost like a really rosy way to kind of look at it. Like in my head, when I kind of think of like it working out really well, and that's all coming together, I'm like,
I think the thing that pushes countries to cooperate that typically don't necessarily want to is somebody is going to take a hit, probably economically, right? But as I like to put it, fantastic. We can either all fight until there's literally no resources left, and I think actually if we reach that state, people, well, all of humanity is gone. That's not true. Humans will survive. They're just, you're going to eat cockroaches for dinner, and it's going to be really brutal, and you're going to have to like OG human style, protect your resources, and like, this is my little farm and my little water source, and you can't come here, right? Like, that could happen. And I think no government on the planet Earth wants to see that. I just think we're unfortunately, this is a process that is happening. Even as fast as it is, it's still happening over decades. And it's hard for people to see it affecting them. But at some point, we're going to reach that place of like, oh, snap. When the tip of Florida is literally underwater, people are going to be like, well,
let's shoot diamonds into the sky.
That's true.
How many feet of water do we need to rise for Miami to wash around?
Well, I hope I get a party there first before that happens. To be honest.
Yeah. And the other thing,
New Orleans is already underwater.
On the
underwater. Sorry, Kendall.
No, it is. And I think the other thing, we talked about this, just the reason we need to change our source of energy, I think our main driver is not, to go back to the beginning of the show, not that these sources are finite, but that they harm the planet such that everything is becoming destabilized. So places that human beings could live no longer really make sense. And the problem is governments are now subsidizing people's, I'll call it climate ignorance, where they're just, I'm moving to Arizona because I can. And it's like, what? Or I'm moving to California, and it's like, I'm sorry, you shouldn't be allowed to get fire insurance because you live in a place that absolutely will have a wildfire that is gigantic this year.
Tinder, like on a hillside, basically.
Exactly. And so we do have to kind of, I'm tying energy and climate together because I think the only reason we are looking so intensely at moving away from fossil fuels is because of the catastrophic impact that climate change will eventually have.
It has, but this might sound a little controversial. I would hate to bring back to the first point we started this.
No, do it.
When we started talking about China being the mass producer of the battery and the cobalt that needed to manufacture those, right?
Yeah.
So, based on what does US has the most metal? What does China has the most cobalt? And if US market has to sustain the needs, they push all the auto manufacturing, correct, since forever. And you saw the industrial revolution here. And now, as you have seen, China, there has been a time where China tried to take over the US market for automotive and they couldn't.
But you said we have aluminum, right?
Right, you have aluminum, you
Which
can
is
make
gonna
engine
be
blocks, right? You can churn those day and night.
Right.
But there has to be a shift from what you can support to make an EV market sustainability US, because you start churning out EVs here in US, let's say 1 million a year, but do you have the support material to sustain for that market? Then essentially what you're doing is growing a business in other part of globe where the practices as we speak are not great, the conditions are not great.
Right. That's fair.
So who are we benefiting out of these?
Right.
There has to be a more sustainable approach rather than shutting it abruptly, just like what we have been doing all the time.
Right.
So that's what I would just say. This might sound a little controversial, but
no, I agree. I actually think that the real solution would be really, really tight cooperation between countries to go. Like, what happens if you actually pay a fair market rate for the lithium that that is just being mined out of Africa, right?
Everyone wants to agree on the same thing, right?
Right? Like, I think...
It seems really idealistic,
Yeah.
but like, I
It
think
is.
our last
We don't
president
want
proved
that.
that like nations can act in very self-interested ways.
I would agree. I just think, again, at some point, and I don't know when that point is, when, look, I'm buying a lot of property in Michigan. I'm hanging out near all the fresh water. Y'all can do what y'all want to do. But at some point, we're going to hit critical mass where everybody's like, well, all right, we've got, instead of 50 years or 100 years, we've got 6 months to, like, fix our everything.
Now we need clean water. We need somewhere to live that's not prone to extreme
Yes.
climate, let's say, events. Because I think, the heating or whatever, I think the real issue is going to be the weather that comes as a result. So that crazy storm in
I'm going to
Texas.
Montana.
Yeah, shit, good luck
I know.
growing food or cultivating your own food. Like, does anyone know how to do that anymore?
No.
No. Our grandparents did.
A lot of it's automated now, too.
Yeah, until supply chain can't do it and you have
Or we
to
don't have
sustain
energy
yourself.
to run the robots.
But on this side, there have been labs that are working on
Yeah.
manufacturing the food.
Oh,
in the lab,
okay.
growing
This
the
is
food
true.
in
What do you
Singapore.
think about
But can
carbon
we supply
recapture
9
on the back of,
billion
ICE
people?
Not
engines?
as of
Is that
now.
something
No.
that's
As
possible?
of now,
I've seen a little
yeah.
bit. I've seen, so I think the technology isn't as good as they like to say,
Okay.
as good as we want it or need it to be. But I think it's like it helps. So maybe scrubbing a percentage, 40-30% of what is actually being pushed out from
Is it-
certain processes.
Is it theoretically possible to get near 100%? Is it?
I think with enough investment in most things, I think we can do it.
Okay.
Right. I mean, you could do that. That just doesn't do anything about what's already in the atmosphere. But I think there's other technologies and industries coming around to handle that. I just think overarchingly, at least, we can focus on our own country in the sense that we just need more capital investment, and I don't know if there's the political will to do that.
It doesn't need to be political will, but it just needs to be market incentive changes, really.
Yeah, but I think the problem is
Is the only market incentive the government?
No, but the amount of capital investment that the federal government, if it decides to,
But-
can put in is
I don't
I
want
mean,
the federal
basically
government putting it in
limitless.
because they're going to hire an agency to research the problem, and then a bunch of people are going to do nothing. Why isn't there
True.
some sort of
Historically.
put bounties on solving problems and then have people try to go do it?
And
Isn't that what a grant is supposed to be for?
That's maybe a newer, more novel way of doing it. I honestly, for the whole coronavirus thing, I thought they were going to put together a several billion-dollar type war chest with whoever comes up with the best vaccine or in time.
yeah.
That never happened, which is kind of crazy. We just went with the everyone do their own thing model.
And we'll give
And
you
look
a
at
shit
where
ton of
it
money
got
to try.
us.
Yeah,
Right.
they just gave money to
So I mean, it's crazy because the government is the most, let's say, most powerful institution that can leverage millions, billions of dollars on, whether it's our behalf or technology for the future, whatever it is. Do they do that? Rarely. So I think you're making a good point. But I'll make an example of something the government did that's, I guess, helpful. So there was a lot of investment, a lot of time put into the weather complex that we use to get our weather data that we track and see everything through. That basically came from U.S. tax dollars. So some people are paying for an app where they're basically repackaging some data we already paid for, research we already did. And it's like with the weatherapp.com, it's crazy, but essentially what I'm saying is a lot of the stuff, we have early prevention for tornadoes. They're tracking hurricanes as 3-4 weeks before they start to form at this point, right? There's a lot of stuff that we would have never gotten to, I believe, without that first leg from the government.
And I'll say that they do a lot of good sometimes, but how much did we spend to invent the ballpoint pen when the Russians used a pencil?
I would argue, and this is the only thing, I will agree with you that government is really inefficient. The problem is, I don't trust the private sector either, because the
I agree
idea
with you there.
that all of a sudden companies, ExxonMobil, perfect example, known since 1966 that climate change was a thing, have papers, research, the whole thing. Like, yeah, no, this is going to happen. What did they do? It was like, well, we could plan for this thing that's going to happen. That Billy right there looking real nice, so we're just going to take that for 50 years, 60 years before we actually start saying, well, maybe.
Well, but they actually tried it in the late 70s, early 80s. They invented the lithium-ion battery that's in these cars today. That was invented by ExxonMobil during the last oil crisis, oil embargo back then.
If I told you,
they gave up because the technology was so volatile and explosive and dangerous to work with at the time.
If I
it
told
wasn't
you,
promising.
Hey, in 100 years, right? We want to be a 100-year business,
Mm-hmm.
and in 100 years, we know this thing is going to happen. We spend billions of dollars every year in R&D, not towards improving technologies or scaling them, but towards literally doing the thing that we know is bad. I guess for me, just to get to the point, the private sector cannot and does not act based on market incentives because markets are also inefficient. We've got these
that's
weird
because we subsidize the markets. This is government interference yet again. If we didn't have the government coming in and saying, hey guys, you're too big to fail because you provide a public good, public utility, which is important. I'm not neglecting that fact. But it's not saying hey, we should be holding these people accountable before they get there. And it's the problem is the scale and the size of these large companies that, they have the ability to have really cheap costs because they don't deliver the goods or services that they say they're going to the way they say they're going to.
But how else
bailing them out.
do you keep the private sector from its selfish and risky behavior other than government watchdogs and regulations?
Tell you what, since you mentioned the gas example, it is perfect example how industry wants to keep on making money without and underlying over the other facts that the side effects it can cause on weather, climate, and everything. So, as we all know, there are different grades of gasoline that you can buy at the high octane, low octane, and ethanol and all sorts of different. So high octanes are supposed to be, this is coming from more technical part, but they are supposed to work better and efficient when it comes to pollution, right?
Right.
Why are we not making the engines in order to make everything fit for the high octane engine? Because they want to, again, this is coming from what heard and say, you might question this, but there is a price difference between high octane and the regular gasoline that we use, that they want to charge anything that they want, but the actual price difference in the manufacturing is probably 5 to 8 cents.
So it's a marketing thing.
It's a marketing thing, right?
Are you shitting me?
It's 5 to 8
so
cents. You could have made that accessible to the globe. Hey, this is the best
Brilliant
gasoline you want to
scheme.
use, but no, we don't want to because we can make infinite amount of money just charging you because you don't understand.
In the 4 P's of marketing, this is called price, and you separate it to high, medium, and low, so that you drive people towards the medium. But most people choose low because they're bargain buyers.
For my capstone in chemical engineering, one of our projects was to basically kind of figure out, how to chemically get what you need to make gasoline, high octane, whatever.
Yeah.
And we also had to calculate the cost for it, and it was not.
It
wasn't that much more expensive, or
Wow.
yeah, it
How
was.
about that?
And the government subsidizes this?
I think for a long time, so Exxon, Chevron, some of these companies were the most profitable, most biggest companies in the world. Chevron was, to your point about they were pouring so much money into R&D, production stuff. They basically went to several governments and said, "We'll build out your state oil business for you. You can manage it in a couple of years, but we have the know-how. They were the guys, right? The smartest guys in the room, right? but I think to Kendall's point, they never use that power to benefit of themselves.
And I think it's very fair to bring that up.
So you give somebody the keys to the future, and they're gonna drive it to where they want to go.
And I think the other thing, just that like, essentially almost like grant model, that bounty to like, hey, I'll give however much money to the person that can figure this out, or the group of people that can figure this out. You know, to me, I always look at it as, I truly believe most of our problems are solvable, barring human nature taking over in certain extents, because literally 60 years ago, before the internet was really a thing, before we had cell phones and computers, we put a human being on the moon. I think we can figure out how to suck carbon out of the atmosphere and renewable energy. I really do, if we just cared enough. And I don't know if we need to start like a climate race with China or the Russians or whatever we got to do to get the NASA version of climate change.
I kind of love that idea.
Yeah, I'm totally on board.
At MIT. Like, I don't know what it is going to take. And maybe that plays to America's strength. We always want to be the best.
Okay, yeah, so we kind of touched on the political, though. This is kind of interesting because I think at least the political landscape in this country is really taking, in my eyes, there's a generational divide that we're just kind of ignoring. Right?
Skirting around.
Right, we've had this conversation a bunch of times where it feels like a lot of times the older generation with a lot more resources, power, and money gets their way. And a lot of times, I think their way is to maintain and keep themselves in power.
You have 80-year-old fucks in power still, and I'm like, you're gonna die in 5 years.
And they don't care.
Pass the baton.
Right? It's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, there's the amount of.
But why do they have to care though? Like, they have their money, they get to do what they want, and
because we keep them in power.
I think this is the most.
I don't even think that's it. I think it's that they're training whoever they want to put in power, so that it continues on whatever they want.
I don't know if it could be about persistence, but I think it could also just be like, hey man, like, let's just bury all the stuff that I did. You scratch my back, I'll let you take over type thing.
The biggest...
Because I feel like it's more selfish like that. They just want a self-preservation. I want to just take my nut and go bury it somewhere else and hang out and be forgotten with my money.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem for us, when I talk about us, I mean our generation, under 30-year-old people, is that generation ahead of us is they have the most money, the most literal power, and the most kind of seats at the table of any generation in American history. So we're taking on, I think this next 10 years is really going to be a fight back and forth between all these things, climate change. I think we kind of started seeing it with the...
I think it's problematic in the age of TikTok where our attention spans are like 10 seconds. Like, how are we all supposed to focus on all the different issues that we have to be focusing on? Like, I think people are tuning out rather than paying attention to this.
Are they tuning out because it's all so fucking overwhelming? Because all of the problems we're left with are just so ginormous? I mean, like, I don't know. That's daunting to me.
Ultimately, I think the if you look at our generation, and I think everybody that's like between, I'll say like 24 and 28, you're in a special spot because you're right in between sort of the older millennials and Gen Z folks that are coming up that are like teenagers right now. I still remember what it was like to play outside till this, the lights, the street lights went off and you had to come home, right? But on the flip side, I've been playing Pokemon for 20 years. So, we've grown up in this technological age and we've come of age during all of this technological advancement. I think what's really tough when you look at, you're exactly right, Kayvon, in that the generation ahead of us, especially boomers, they still hold. Even though millennials now, there's more millennials, like we have finally sort of outpaced boomers. The thing is, boomers still have the political power and the money. I kind of, you're probably going to push back. Please vote. Just vote. Please vote.
No. I actually agree with you here.
Please
because
vote.
the only way to get the boomers out of office is to vote them out of office.
Sidebar
Like,
real quick.
I don't believe that people will have the motivation to do it, but like, I agree with you, Kendall. People should, and I voted, and everyone should vote.
Yes. How do you feel about Joe Biden saying, I'm not sure if I have the power to wipe away $50,000 worth of student loan for people? This is after we just saw another president give how much money to these companies that
He has the power to do it.
Yeah, he doesn't
that's why
want
he
to.
promised it beforehand, because everyone believed he has the power to do it.
It's weird. Like, as soon as it comes to us, I'm not sure, guys. Like,
I don't know about this one.
That just goes to the point. Like these boomers are trying to do anything to keep us from making money and getting into certain aspects of power. So we find other ways like Bitcoin or Ethereum or NFTs or whatever to try to figure out how we can make as much money so we can get a seat at the table at least. Like
Prove our worth, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's such an interesting thing too, because if you think about all these new technologies and the regulation of them, as Congress is like trying to check Mark Zuckerberg. It's like, yo, you were 50 years old when the internet was a thing. I think you can, like, yo, just chill out.
We created things that they don't even really understand,
Oh,
and they're trying to
Still
regulate
don't.
it. And
Right.
it's kind of like, how can you regulate something you don't understand at all?
Like, when I was 14, I was getting into, like, cryptography through peer-to-peer torrenting. Like, you're downloading movies and, like, music from the internet for free, and everyone's like, oh, let's go to, like, Blockbuster, and now we're paying from Netflix. And it's like, no, you can get this stuff for free on the internet. And they can't do anything about it. They can't track it, because how would they come in and regulate this?
I feel like there may be ways, but they just don't even know where to start or what's going on.
Well, they have to start using the technology and, like, actually doing
It's like we
stuff
kind of
with
had
it.
to create these things that they couldn't understand so we could try to make money somehow.
It's almost like they would need to work with us.
Yeah, if you really wanted to get in on it and understand it, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, like Goldman Sachs and all those people are now getting in at Bitcoin when it's like
Now.
60K. When, there were 18-year-olds that had it, like, when it was, like, $100 or something. You know what I'm saying?
And they're
So-
not even telling you. They've been in Bitcoin for, like, the last 10 years. That was a side bet they made, and now they're hyping it up to increase their, like, value.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be
For
surprised.
sure. But, like, I hate the DeFi whole thing because I feel like it's placing the value on the wrong part of cryptocurrency. Like, it's not that the token itself exists that makes it valuable, it's the integrity of the underlying data, and people keep forgetting that. Like, DeFi bros really mystified. It's like, ooh, this is this cool stock.
Do you think they forget? Do you think they don't really understand?
They don't know.
Oh, they definitely
They have
don't
absolutely
understand.
no concept.
Yeah.
But there's people that understand it.
They're the
still,
sellers.
And they're like, nah, I'm gonna just gamify it and take the money.
And that's how we
Like,
get people to want to come and invest in it and maybe actually put what we want. Maybe.
I think ultimately
it's still predatory though.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I think that generational divide is something that's a tough problem to solve, because there's also the fact that, frankly, some of our parents might be in that generation, folks a little bit older than that. The social conditions that they grew up in are different than ours. One is, and two, I would argue, and the part about student loans, I know we were talking about energy and climate, but I think it's important to couch all of that as, what are we investing in? And the people making those investment decisions are just kind of weird. It's like, the student loan thing is the perfect example. So wait. We're going to bail out ginormous company, GM. We're going to bail out Delta. We're
American
going to
Airlines.
banks. And then when the kids that you told to get an education at all costs are like, yo, it's time for that bailout. It's like, no, we don't have the money. I don't know where the power is. you should pay back your loans because you took them out. It
Your
makes
parents did also.
makes no sense.
If you talk about it in the macroeconomic sense, like we talked about earlier, anyways, it makes sense in the sense of the global middle class. Like, if everything are these scale enterprises, the U.S. has to hold on to all their large businesses because that's how they offer the global world. Like, they have the biggest brands, and so they're preserving that shit. It's ridiculous, but like that's the bet they're making is not on the Americans, but on the brands of the companies that represent America. Like, that's why they're bailing them out.
I'd say the frustrating part is these companies weren't run very well to begin with, right? I took Delta, Southwest, a couple different flights in the last couple of years, and I was never happy. I'm gonna be honest. So when I saw the seat tickets were super cheap, I had like, maybe they're gonna go under, whatever it is, but my understanding of the business world is they're gonna file for bankruptcy, somebody's gonna come in, actually get the business working the right way, and basically somebody gets a new shot to really do this right. That didn't happen just now, right? And that's I think a really big example of that generation trying to hold on to this power at the cost of the future, us. Right?
Yeah,
I like that presentation of it too.
Such a great way to put it, especially just to kind of pound on Delta a little bit. You make 10 billion in profits over, a decade or whatever it is. And I'm told that when things hit the fan in my life, pull yourself up. This is America. You should have had an emergency fund. Yeah. You didn't save. And I'm like, yo, Delta, so what about that rainy day fund? Huh?
Crazy.
How about that?
It's in the pockets of their CEO.
Yeah, it is. And just in general, and we were kind of talking about this earlier, but in general, I think for older generations, the idea is generally, if we want to fix something or do something, just put more people into it. It's why college is as expensive as it is. Let's get another administrator to then figure out the thing that the other administrator is also working on, but it's a subsection of the same subject. It's like a donut hole inside of a donut hole.
Small government person to me now, because that's what I keep saying.
Here's my thing with, again, kind of trying to couch this whole discussion in terms of investment. I believe that when done correctly, and I would agree with most small market people in that it almost never is, for various reasons. When those investments are made correctly, you're not going to hit on all of them, but some of them could help drive not just economic growth, but secure the future, right, for future generations.
Yeah, education was a huge one. And the crazy thing about the last year is I think the universities in the United States of America are some of the basically the best capitalized institutions around, meaning they pull in a fucking shit ton of money, and they're not really taxed like everyone else. So what they're doing with that money, I'm sure you've seen around Ann Arbor for the last couple of years. Okay, they're getting really, really rich. And this last year, when everything hit the fan, for whatever reason, they couldn't take a hit this year. They couldn't take a hit for 1 year. They're charging people full tuition. And for business school, I know a guy.
Well, it's really clear where all the money's going. Have you seen all the buildings that they've been putting up? It's like, God, it's a luxury palace to go to school here.
And I remember a few years back when Ross was building a new building, they needed to move a tree, and I'm all for saving 100-year-old trees, mind you. $400,000 to move a tree.
Why not build around it?
I don't know, because the building didn't look the way we wanted it to. Or maybe our donor said, nah, this is not the way this is going to go. It's just, there are so many market inefficiencies in American life, and we have to find a way to fix them. I don't know if they're market
inefficiencies so much as like there's too much power being concentrated in any one person's hands. Like,
that's a great way to
CEO, like they're, I get the idea of having one person at the top, but maybe the board should have a lot more control, or like the executives, like, because clearly just one person making all the decisions is easily corruptible.
Yeah,
it's crazy because the political will, when it is there, it's we move swift and things get done.
Yeah.
When it's not there, we're all like, why can't we get something moving?
It's like a
legislation
fine
gets-
balance.
Man.
There are so many things I want to say on that.
Yeah, no, you have that great line I love about a benevolent monarch.
Yeah, this is the thing. If you look at the different forms, and we are off on a tangent, so if you could
Yeah, wait, we were
You
talking
could-
about energy?
you could like stop when we stop talking about energy, but we're just
Yeah.
gonna keep rolling for a bit. If you look at forms of government, right, there's a reason typically monarchies existed. Because if you get lucky and you get somebody that's not an idiot, that actually really loves their people, things tend to happen quickly, and if something goes wrong, they can switch, and things, you could have a kingdom that flourishes for 30 years or whatever it is. The problem is, and the reason we moved away from it, is because the trade-off, democracy might be slow, but democracy is real stable. There isn't this like, well,
So
hey,
stable, one might say it doesn't even move anymore.
exactly, and it's that way by design. So that is, I think, where we want this quick investment in our future, energy, climate, all these different things, and the power is concentrated amongst elder citizens.
That's a really cool point about the kings, because I always remember, at least just imagining what's going on over in whether it's China or Russia. It's like they have, I think when you have a prime minister, president, or whatever, like they have like a quarterback of their team that's been there for 30, 40 years, knows what's going on, knows how. It's Brett Favre, right?
Yeah.
We switch out our quarterback every 4 years.
Yep.
Right. And it's hard to get the continuity that you need to, like, you can kind of see politically how we swing back and forth.
What the
kinda why I
first
like
8
stuff
weeks does
happening
not even, like, that's all you get for the 4 years worth of information, 4 to 8?
If
Are you
look over
shitting
to-
me?
If you look over to Europe, there's some really cool government structures over there where, like, people are in power until, like, the people's faith in the politician is waned enough for them to be, essentially put up to a revote.
Yeah.
Like, as long as the direction of the company is good, you can stay in power. And I think that's really interesting. It's very exploitable by the media and propaganda, of course, but, like,
That's a whole complex.
yeah, no, that's its own industry, really.
Yeah.
So,
We'll cover that in another episode.
but yeah, I think there's interesting things to look at, but yeah, not to derail us further.
I think we can put a pin in it here.
Maybe there's like a part 2.
Yeah, I think this
Yeah, right.
energy discussion will probably lead to an episode where we can talk about big versus small government and how do we invest, because I think that no matter what, a lot of the things we've talked about, right? Our first episode, climate, we've talked about reparations, energy, all of these things require capital investment, and the folks making those decisions, I think it's worth an episode. So, in the meantime, y'all keep arming yourselves with knowledge, and we will catch you in the next one.
Thanks for listening.